Helena, could you give me host capabilities so that I can share my screen, please?
Oh, sure.
Thank you.
Can I? Sorry, just give me a minute.
I did just try and
okay. That should do it.
Okay, yeah, I can see that I've changed my status. Thank you very much indeed. Okay, so can everybody see that shared screen?
Yeah.
Fantastic, that's great. Well, first of all, I would like to say thank you very much to everybody for inviting me along to speak this evening. I just think that, you know, Ninewells Garden is amazing. It's an awesome facility in a fantastic location with great board and facilitators. So thank you very much for including me in your AGM and for inviting me to come along. Really great to hear about all the links between nature and health. So today I've been asked to come along to give a sort of you know, an overview, a kind of a demystifying what is COP26, what's going on with it and what's going on locally, and maybe a little bit about what we can do. And I'm really delighted to be able to do that. So as Helena said earlier, if you've got questions, please feel free to either save them till the end or to write them in the chat box, and I'll be really happy to help with questions. But I'm also going to maybe help you to instigate some ideas about what you can do too. So here we go. So the agenda for today is for me to give you a quick overview of some issues and maybe seek out some questions to answer. So you might guess from the photographs that I've been to Ninewells Community Garden more than once. This was actually on a recent visit to A&E when, as a driver, I wasn't allowed in because it was COVID restrictions and I needed to just wait outside. And what better place to wait than in the wonderful community garden? So today, and absolutely refreshed by my time in the garden, I'm going to share with you a little bit of information about what is COP26, why is it so important, how can nature and gardens like Ninewells Gardens help with climate, what's happening locally, how can you get involved, and basically, you know, a call to action for everybody. What will you do? So start right at the beginning, at the very start of my presentation, by asking yourself the question, what will you do? And if at the end of this presentation, I get a whole load of suggestions from you about what you'd like to do, that would be so brilliant in place of questions for me. So that's my challenge. So there's a bit of text on the next couple of slides, for which I apologise, but there's a lot of information surrounding these big climate events. So let me just start with a couple of slides explaining what COP26 is. So COP26 is an annual climate conference, and this year it's hosted by the UK in partnership with Italy. It's going to take place in Glasgow from the 31st of October to the 12th of November, and it'll be at the SEC, the Scottish Events Campus. So what does COP stand for? COP stands for, very simply, Conference of the Parties. It's a coming together of the relevant people that need to make decisions. It's an annual climate summit of the United Nations climate body. COP26 is a climate conference, but did you know there's also COP15 this year? COP15, Conference of the Parties for Biodiversity. And it's taking place in Kunming in China from the 11th to the 24th of October. It also should have taken place sooner. So COP26 should have taken place last November, but it was delayed because of the pandemic. And COP15 for Biodiversity should have taken place also earlier, but was delayed because of the pandemic. So this Conference of the Parties, who are the parties? The parties are the countries and the global bodies that are signatories to the UN framework called the UNFCCC. They are the parties. So that just asks the next question, what on earth is the UNFCCC? Well, the UNFCCC is the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. So it entered into force on the 21st of March, 1994, and it's got nearly universal membership globally. 197 countries that have ratified the convention are all parties to the convention. So the Conference of the Parties, COP, they are all those countries that are members of this convention framework. And the aim of this framework is preventing dangerous human interference with the climate system. That is the ultimate aim of the convention, of the UNFCCC. The objective of the convention is to stabilise greenhouse gas concentrations at a level that would prevent dangerous human interference with the climate system. And such a level should be achieved within a time frame sufficient to allow ecosystems to adapt naturally to climate change, to ensure that food production is not threatened, and to enable economic development to proceed in a sustainable manner. So that ultimate objective, that aim of the UNFCCC is what underpins the need for the annual climate conference, the COP. And remember that there are COPs for other things too, including biodiversity. So how are we doing with that ambition? Well, not great. The world is warming faster than at any point in recorded history. The global average temperature is now more than 1.1 degrees centigrade higher than at the beginning of the last century. 1 degree higher doesn't sound like a lot, does it? But in terms of global annual averages, it really is quite significant. The ambition at the moment for the agreements that are going to take place at COP26 is that we keep global warming below 1.5. So we've already got to more than 1.1. We don't have a lot of wriggle room here. We've got a tiny space to play with. And we can't change the emissions that have already been emitted and the effects that they're already going to have that, that we have no further control over. So if this warming continues, we'll see, sorry for the doom and gloom, but the reality is that we'll see devastating humanitarian, ecological and economic impacts. We'll see food shortages, we'll see fires, I think we've already seen a few. We'll see raising sea levels, we'll see floods. We don't need to mention how much they've been in the news, even just in the last week, and extreme weather. And the scientific basis for all of this climate change is, and I'm sorry for all these initials, are the reports from the IPCC, and that's the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. The IPCC provides policymakers with regular scientific assessments on climate change, what the implications of those assessments are, those changes, and what the potential future risks are, so that we can put forward adaptation and mitigation options. Now, this colourful band that you see at the bottom of my slide here is a really clever graphical representation by a scientist called Ed Hawkins. And this is a sort of hashtag show your stripes. And these stripes are the global temperature change since 1850 to 2019, so around the globe. And you don't have to look very hard or be a rocket scientist or a climate scientist to see that they go from blue through neutral to very red in the recent past. So in 1994, when the UNFCCC had that framework convention, you could imagine that we were beginning to see a change, that the trajectory was beginning to emerge, but look where we've got to since then. It's really clear. And this is the global temperature change, but I'm going to bring us a bit closer to home. Here are the stripes for Scotland. Okay, so we can see that it's a bit different. We don't see, because obviously the global average is averaged over all the countries and all the regions and all the polar differences and all the continental differences, but we can break it down for Scotland. And here we see, even with a few blips and maybe the odd cold stripe, we are also in Scotland seeing this very rapid warming. And it's clear that this is affecting all parts of the world. So in Scotland, we're not immune. from the impacts of climate change. It's great to have this data from 1884 to 2020. And if you would like to have a look at the stripes for Antarctica or for Antigua or for anywhere else, you can just go to showyourstripes.info on Google or whichever your preferred platform is. So coming back to COP26, I've got a question. How are Paris and Glasgow linked? Some of us might like to go on a short break to Paris at the moment. Some of us might think that's the last thing we want to do with COVID everywhere. But how are Glasgow and Paris linked? Well, the Paris Agreement, which I'm sure you've all heard of, was signed at COP21, which was the Conference of the Parties, the 21st Conference of the Parties for Climate Change. And that happened in Paris in 2015. So COP21 is where the Paris Agreement was signed. And that was the first time that almost every country around the world entered into a legally binding commitment to reduce emissions. So the Paris Agreement was really, really important. And there's been a COP22 and a COP23 and a COP24 and a COP25. But why is COP26 so important? Well, this is a really important opportunity for the nations to come together and review what they've done since Paris to make commitments and to strengthen their ambition. They've got to basically show that they've got a roadmap that commits them to meaningful action that will get them to what they agreed to in the Paris Agreement. So they're going to review the measures in Glasgow COP26. They're going to review the measures approved at COP21 in Paris that were due to be implemented by 2020, because of course COP26 should have happened in 2020. So that's how Paris and Glasgow are linked in terms of COP. This is a really important COP for climate. It's the one where we've got to get this nailed down, or else there's no time left to make these changes. And the way that each country is making these changes is through nationally determined contributions, NDCs. There's an awful lot of jargon around COP26. There's a lot of initials. There's a lot of abbreviations. These NDCs, that just simply stands for nationally determined contributions. The postponement of COP26 has basically meant that we've had a bit longer to get our nationally determined contribution together to figure out how we're going to get to that legally binding Paris Agreement commitment that we made. And every other country, as well as fighting COVID, as well as dealing with the pandemic, has had that little bit extra time to just really get this nailed. So we need to make sure that our submission of our NDC, our nationally determined contribution, basically is in line with our targets. And on the 12th of December last year, the UK communicated its new NDC to the UN. So it basically set out, this is what we're promising to do. And this commits the UK to reducing economy-wide greenhouse gases by at least 68% by 2030, compared to 1990 levels. These are big targets, big ambitions, and short timeframes. And every single country has got to be doing something similar, and particularly the developed countries that are the higher emitters of climate change gases. We've really got to show that we're doing our part. And what has the presidency of the COP got to do with it? It means that if we're hosting the COP, the UK with Italy are hosting the COP, we're potentially bringing 30,000 people to Glasgow from 200 different relevant parties, signatories. Now let's see if it's virtual or blended or whatever, actually in person. I'm not sure about that. I don't have that knowledge. I suspect some people won't be able to attend. I think COP will still be affected by COVID. But the UK want it to be a success. As hosts of this really critical COP, the UK want it to be a success. So that's why if you follow COP26 on Twitter or other social media platforms, you'll see Alok Sharma, the UK president of COP, going around all these different countries. He's in Slovenia today. You know, he's been virtually in China. He's been, you know, actually in all these other places. And it's trying to make sure that all the other countries, all the NDCs are going to be the right size to fit the jigsaw puzzle that has to come together to give us this global response. So what happens at this COP when it happens in October, November this year? What happens? Well, there's the main thing I'm going to just let you know is there's two zones. There's a blue zone and a green zone. And the blue zone is where all the negotiations happen. That's when the UNFCC, the UN Framework Convention for Climate Change, the official UN body, that's where they coordinate those negotiations, the big high level negotiations that are happening, really security bounded. Only a few people get a blue zone pass. They're the ones that need to be in those negotiations making those decisions. The green zone is for the general public. So there is an area at COP which is about events, workshops, art exhibitions, installations, musical performances, presentations, demonstrations, a bit like an expo. So there's the kind of expo show ground area of COP, and then there's the kind of conference in-depth conversations that happen as well. And really a lot of the work for COP, those in-depth conversations, it's fine-tuning. Everything's needing to happen now. Or like I mentioned earlier, that the NDC for the UK was issued in December. It needs to have happened already. So I don't know if you all already knew about COP already, or if some of that's useful and interesting information. But I just wanted to give you a bit of an overview about what happens at COP. And I hope that I'm going to go into the local picture in a moment as well, but I hope that I've also, really kind of reinforced that it's a global effort that's needed to achieve the COP26 goals, to achieve the legally binding Paris Agreement. And there's some kind of headlines. So one of those headlines for what COP is trying to do is securing global net zero carbon emissions, that is, by mid-century 2050, and keep 1.5 degrees within reach. So it still sounds a bit like we might not make it from that kind of language, but we need to keep 1.5 degrees within reach. We really need to not have runaway anthropogenic human climate change. So that's where all the countries have to come together and all the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle have to fit in order to get to that target. We're also looking at ways to work with nature to adapt and protect communities and natural habitats, because we know that climate and nature and community are so intrinsically interlinked. We need to change our finance systems. We need to mobilize finance to help us to reach the goals, but we also need to figure out how to have more climate-friendly economic systems. So that's a huge goal for this COP. And we certainly need to have that collaborative piece working together to deliver. We can only rise to this challenge if we all work together. We need to deliver on these goals faster than we have done to date, and we need to do it yesterday. So we've got to work together. So both nature and biodiversity have a huge role to play. I'm going to read you this quote from, and I'm sorry, there's another set of initials here, but I'm going to read you this quote from the chair of the IPBES. That's the Intergovernmental Platform for Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. I mentioned IPCC earlier, the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change. Here's the Intergovernmental Panel that has to do with biodiversity and ecosystem services. And I'm delighted to let you know that the COP15 for biodiversity and the COP26 for climate change are working together more than those units have ever worked together before. So this is what Ana Maria Hernandez Salgar has to say. Climate change is already impacting nature, from genes to ecosystems. An integrated approach to both biodiversity loss and climate change is required if we are to properly address these challenges, including by relying more on nature to help mitigate climate change. So working with nature to help us achieve those climate ambitions. So we need to look to nature, we need to work with nature, and we need to add value to nature. And we can do that by using nature-based solutions. We can engage nature-based engineering approaches. We can encourage and create biodiversity zones. We can re-wild and re-wet wetlands and peatlands. We should certainly protect the ones that we have. We can look at coastal protection. whether it's coastal dunes, whether it's seagrass offshore, looking at river restoration. And within our urban environments, and also rural, but particularly in our urban environments, looking at blue and green infrastructure. So blue and green spaces in our grey cities are going to be critical in terms of helping to cool those warming urban environments, to enhance the way in which we can protect and encourage biodiversity zones, pollinator pathways, and basically protect our environments that should make them comfortable for people as well as for other aspects of the natural world. And I include a quote at the bottom, which is inscribed in the rafters of the Royal Scottish Geographical Society headquarters in Perth. And the quote is, "Man talks of a battle with nature, forgetting that if he won the battle, he would find himself on the losing side." So Schumacher's quote here reminds us that we are nature. We are part of it, and we require to work with it and for it if we want to have a world to live in for ourselves. So one of the ways we can do that is by looking at nature-based solutions. So nature-based solutions are really, looking to nature for the answer, working with nature to get to the results that we need. We get multiple benefits. So nature-based solutions are about harnessing nature to help deliver a range of outcomes simultaneously, those multiple benefits, including for climate change, communities, public health, and a green recovery from COVID-19 to bring it right into the current consideration. In particular, nature-based solutions have a critical role to play in responding to climate change. They have a role in removing carbon, preventing emissions, and helping us adapt and become resilient to the impacts that are already occurring. And so we know from our friends in the Dundee Green Health Partnership that there's huge mental and physical health benefits, recovery benefits to be gained from spending time in nature. We need good quality natural spaces to enable that recovery to happen, those health benefits to be gained. So places like the Ninewells Community Garden, the parks, gardens, wild, green and blue spaces, our coasts around Dundee. We're very lucky in Dundee. We've got one of the greenest cities in Scotland in terms of the percentage of tree canopy and green space that we have. And so we should have every chance of gaining these multiple benefits and really working with nature to deliver nature-based solutions. And you can see on this little chart here that I've got the nature-based solutions help us with the climate emergency. They help to address the loss of nature, which is really, that other emergency that we should be dealing with immediately as well. The importance for young people for learning and play, to gain stronger communities and sustainable places, to enhance our health and well-being, and to have inclusive economic growth, growing nature-based industries. So these nature-based solutions, working across disciplines, working across sectors, working across private, public, community and voluntary, is going to be really important in terms of addressing the climate emergency and addressing the biodiversity emergency. So I'm now just going to finish with a couple of slides on what's happening locally. So you may or may not know that in June 2019, Dundee City Council declared a climate emergency. In December 2019, the Dundee Climate Action Plan was launched, and it's very much a partnership. It includes not just the City Council and the universities and Friends of the Earth and all sorts of groups that are involved. And it's got several themes, including energy, transport, waste and resilience. And Dundee City Council are also members of the Covenant of Mayors, which you may or may not have heard of, but it's a Europe-wide kind of network of city leaders who have an ambition to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and to achieve net zero greenhouse gas by 2045 or sooner. So regardless of their national ambitions, these city leaders have got even stronger ambitions to meet those challenges sooner. And Dundee is a signatory to the Covenant of Mayors. I had only heard of it previously when I was working with European partners, and I thought it was fantastic. So I was delighted when I heard that in, I think it was 2018, 2019, that John Alexander had signed up to this covenant, because it's supporting, it's about cities supporting each other, sharing knowledge and experiences in order to get where we need to be. It's about working together and being stronger together. So coming a little bit further up into the current day, Dundee City Council, the Sustainable Dundee Group, have also set up a COP26 planning group. There are a programme of events associated with COP26 that are happening in Dundee. And these are happening across the COP period, so they're happening from the 26th of September to the 12th of November, but probably for a full year, actually, they'll go beyond those dates. There's lots of partners joining all the time, so I don't know if anybody from the community garden is on that planning group, but they're welcoming people to join in and to be a part of it. And the main thing that they're organising is a launch event on the 26th of September, which is also the launch date for the active travel hub at the waterfront at Slessor Gardens. So there'll be a big event on the 26th. Other things that are happening, I'm so delighted to report to you that the Eco Schools agenda, which previously only had 4% of schools in the Dundee area involved, COP26 has really gained the imagination of school children and teachers alike. And now we've got more than 40% of schools are on the line, somewhere along the continuum, trying to get towards Eco School status. And the Eco Schools organisers, I think it's a Keep Britain Beautiful, they're working on actually, modernising the Eco Schools agenda and trying to make that more accessible for more schools. So that's fantastic. So it's COP26 has been a real launch pad for some existing agendas that were already there. It's really helped galvanise and capture the imagination. And there's just so much going on. So what else is happening locally? Okay, so I'm just going to give you a quick overview of three things. Rewilding Dundee, the Climate Beacons for COP26, and the Tayside COP26 Coalition. Some of you may be involved heavily in all of these things or some of these things, but some of you might not have heard of them before. So bear with me if you are already involved, and I'll just give a quick one slide on each of them so that you can see what's going on. So the Climate Beacons for COP26, this is really exciting. There's only 7 climate beacons that were funded by Creative Carbon Scotland, and a joint bid from Tayside, from Dundee organisations, was one of the successful climate beacons. So that means there'll be a year of events in the run up to COP and all the way into next summer that are happening. Now this is led by Dundee Rep, by Liam Sinclair at Dundee Rep Theatre, but it also has the James Hutton Institute, Abertay University, the V&A, the Science Centre, the Heritage Trust, the Museum of Transport, so many different partners. And that's just the starting partnership. There's more coming with opportunities for creative practitioners, artists, people involved in culture and creativity, in design, in science, to come together and work together as part of the Climate Beacon. So they've just recently closed a call for a Climate Beacon manager. So that call for that job description actually closed just a few days ago. And so once that manager's in place, we'll start to hear more about the Tayside Climate Beacon. So loads of things happening. There'll be citywide and region-wide. Sometimes there might be a thing happening on a certain date, and other times there might be agendas that cross over a longer time span. So please do keep an eye out and you can find out more. I'm happy to share these slides so that the links can be clicked on for people that want to follow up some of these links. The other one is Rewilding Dundee. I'm sure you've heard of this. It's run by the University of Dundee Botanic Gardens. It's launched this project in March of this year, and it's really got a simple aim. It's to get people to use their own spaces that they have available to them, their private gardens, to basically try and increase wildlife-friendly gardening in the space that's available to each individual, and to basically, to map that on their map. So they've got an opportunity for us to all map it, so we can see that the increase that's happening by mapping the postcodes of our gardens and increasing this kind of climate-friendly city in our private garden spaces as well as in the public garden spaces. And Tayside COP26 Coalition, this is something that's very recent and just starting off. It's a voluntary association bringing together community groups, individuals and initiatives across Tayside that are concerned about the climate emergency and the impacts that it's got on society and environment. They're really interested in raising awareness about climate change. and the risks that come with it. They want to explore collectively where our interests are best served within our community, and they've got a very strong focus on a just transition, so trying to make it a fair move to whatever new normal we have to do in order to meet climate change and climate justice. So one of the things that you can do is you can check out their Facebook page, and they've got a set of calendar events. So some of the things I've mentioned already are on this list of events, but I thought that was quite useful in terms of being able to see some of the things that are coming up that you might want to get involved in as a garden or as private individuals or as volunteers with this group or with others. And you can see that the 26th of September is listed there as the launch of the Dundee COP26 programme of events and the launch of the Dundee Active Travel Hub. And before that, there's the Tayport Climate Festival, and there's a green walk in the Botanic Gardens and the Climate Fringe Week. So September is going to be busy. There's lots going on. Okay. So if you want to, Helena, there's somebody waiting to be admitted. I don't know if you want to do that or, anyway, I'll let you deal with that.
You've got the host, so I can't do it.
Oh, I've just, hang on. Let me see if I can do something about that. Oh, I'm not sure. Hopefully they'll try and get admitted again, and then I will admit the person, and hopefully that's all okay. How about that? Okay, so if you want to get involved in the big COP26, you can go to the COP26 website and you can follow the links to get involved, and there's stuff that you can do there. If you want to get involved in things locally, this is really a call for action to everybody, to every single one of us worldwide, and particularly those of us on this call. The clock is ticking. 2050, this mid-century that we're all kind of aiming for to have everything in place, it's going to be here sooner than we think. And we know that we need to do what we have to do for these guys, for the kids that were at the September 2019 climate school strike in Dundee city centre that can't yet vote, but are asking us to do something to help save the future for them. We know that maybe our economy needs to change a bit because, you know, if only trees gave off Wi-Fi as well as oxygen, we might value them a bit more. So we need to take care of what our value systems are. We need to encourage the things that are going to help us to have a livable planet, as well as maintaining sort of, you know, prosperity for folks. So the clock is ticking. The UN is challenging us as well. It's not just me. There's a challenge for all of us. The UN Climate Change's Momentum for Change initiative. There's Global Action Awards. There are all sorts of things that are out there in terms of challenging us all to make a change. The planet is in our hands, and that was the COP21 thing. So I'm just going to end there, and I'm going to say, you know, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? Are you going to make a change in your garden? Are you going to volunteer somewhere? Are you going to make a change in your pension plan? Are you making sure that your investments are all ethical and climate friendly? Are you going to just boil the water in the kettle that you need for your one cup of tea rather than filling it every time? Are you going to mend something rather than buying something new? So there's lots and lots and lots of things you can do. So I'd love to hear from you what you think you would like to do, what you can do, what you wish you could do. Thanks very much, everyone. So I don't see any questions in the chat, but I'm really happy for people to unmute themselves and to ask a question or to pop something in the chat or to tell me what they're doing. Is that okay?
Hi, Rebecca. My name's Jim Doig, and I'm one of the volunteers at Ninewells Garden. I did send a few bits and bobs in the chat as during your presentation, but only to Helena.
Oh.
My first one was, what is the linkage between COP15 and COP26 as they deal with intrinsically linked topics. But as I typed that, you were kind of covering it, but yeah, totally agree. The two are linked, and it's somewhat strange that they're separate, but I think, yeah.
So more than ever before, the people that are involved in the negotiations for the COP for biodiversity and the COP for climate change are having formal negotiations where those bodies come together. So although it's kind of difficult to make decisions across different decision-making units before all the decisions have been made within those units, they're really trying their hardest to come together because they know that one relies on the other. And if the decisions made for one negatively impact the other, then they won't be able to meet their targets. They won't be able to meet their ambitions. So Jim, you're absolutely right. And, you know, it's sort of at Paris in 2015, those discussions should have been more explicit. But now, as we get to 2021, we've got a greater awareness of the need for nature-based solutions, engineering with nature, materials, all sorts of things, embedded carbon and embodied carbon, and also things like, you know, understanding Indigenous knowledge and giving a voice to, you know, different cultural approaches to working with nature and biodiversity. Mm-hmm. And, you know, we could think about maybe the Amazon or about the Aboriginal approaches to managing sort of Australian forest fires. We could think about the fires that have been raging in North America and in the Arctic as well. And just think about, well, maybe we don't actually have the answers, maybe we're not asking the right questions to the right people. So those voices are beginning to be heard, not loud enough and not fast enough, but more than they were before.
That sounds good, thank you. Well, I've got a few other points, but rather than me hog the discussion, I'll just go through them quickly if I may. There's also lots of good quotes from E.O. Wilson, Ed Wilson, and Rachel Carson. I think everyone should read their works, particularly Rachel Carson, because she did the seminal work on where things were going round and going wrong in the times of DDT, etc. On the other point, everyone keeps quoting Dundee is so green, but look at the grass areas that make up that percentage, and it's devoid of any benefit to nature. It's closely, and it's not just the council, it's all over. Grasslands are being mowed to within a millimetre of life, and there's just no good in that ground for pollinators. I lead the Nature and Climate subgroup at Ninewells Garden. So can we work with you, please?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I'm keen to support you guys in any way that I can. And I think that we've got our work cut out for us, because although, you know, you might see the benefit of leaving grass to grow, I see on social media from people in Dundee the pushback as well. And so I see that the local authority that have to make those decisions are dealing with some very loud voices against the biodiverse areas, as well as the voices for. And so, you know, those of us that see the benefit in having those pollinator pathways, those bee lines, those biodiverse areas, we need to make sure we're, you know, speaking to our elected officials and making our voice heard at least as loudly as the people who think it's untidy.
Well, I'm a member of Eco Dundee, and there's I don't know how many square metres it is, but it's a grassland between Mallaig Avenue and Thurso Crescent. And we worked with Jay, oh gosh, can't remember his name, and the two Allisons from the council. And we've got a large area with unmowed meadow with desire lines running through it. And it's going to take a few years. We got Ian Ford involved so he could put forward some knowledgeable experience. But just last week, they've sprayed all the areas with glyphosate around the flats. It's now up at MSP level, and they're pursuing this on our behalf. And well, as you know, as you can hear, I'm really keen to forward this. And I should have been at the local COP meeting tonight, but I came along to listen to you instead, and it's been a great session. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim, for coming along and for sharing your passion for biodiversity and climate action. That's really appreciated.
Okay, thank you very much, Rebecca.
Can I just add into that? I had that other side of the conversation today. Somebody came past saying how messy the place was and how they hadn't cut the grass, and it gave an opportunity to just talk through life cycles and the different sort of reasons for letting the grass grow, and the fact that maybe you're not going to have this floral meadow. If you're doing a perennial meadow, it will take some years to establish, but there's that massive lack of just maybe explaining what they're doing or why they're doing it, and I think it's really hard if you're not a planty person to understand why that's being left in what looks to you like a weed, because you don't see the value. And I think that's the massive thing that we have to kind of try and jump across. And by having these one-to-one conversations, I think, I mean, it's not all we can do, but it's a start.
Exactly, Helena. We need to engage with people, get them on side. You just can't force this down people's throats. Look at the number of gardens that are houses that don't have a garden any longer. It's been turned into parking spaces. It's last year we had thousands upon thousands of St. Mark's flies flying in the spring. Didn't see one at all this year, and people were complaining about all the flying insects. They're just so valuable to the environment. They sustain human life. People just need to understand this more, and we need to explain the importance of all this and get people on side. Exactly, Helena, I agree.
Emma, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, absolutely. Can I add to this? I don't know if we're still being recorded, but I'll say it anyway.
Yeah.
And I say this, I think everyone knows I'm not the most green-fingered of people, but I truly appreciate it. And I'm always the girl that moves to a city and needs a bed now. I think there's a huge amount of work to do with private rented accommodation. In terms of the gardens, private rented accommodation is a very short-term spell. I live in the student area, Dundee, and I love it for that reason. I deliberately live here for that reason. But it is very short-term focused. And actually, if you would put on an advertisement, actually where you're moving to, the reason that part of the garden to a naive eye like myself from the East End of London actually looks a bit unkempt, there is a reason for it. I think there's huge power in that, particularly for the generation of 18, 19, 20, 21-year-olds who are far more environmentally aware than my generation were back in the 90s. So I think there is, in a market, in an urban environment like Dundee, where you've got a huge amount of a transient student population, to make that, to work with private landlords, to work with local estate agents who are advertising these short-term rental lets. I think that's quite sexy. I think it's quite attractive. The problem is we're just not doing it. So I think actually, yes, absolutely, you can lobby your local MP against some local Dundee people who don't agree with the local parks being quote unquote unkempt. However, I think my back garden will attest to someone moving in and it looking an absolute state, and I'm happy, and my excuse is that it absolutely is doing the local environment a general good. But I think my point is, if it's advertised, I think there's some very brief intervention work we can do there that is actually going to be more attractive to the current young generation than it would have been my generation.
So Emma, what are you going to do about it?
I'm going to talk to the tenants in my block, and I'm going to say to them, do not sort out our back garden, it's fine. No, I think, so those who don't know me, I'm a health psychologist. I'm interested in environmental design. My connection with Ninewells Community Garden is probably of an admin role rather than the green-fingered approach that Helena and June absolutely manage on a day-to-day basis. What am I going to do? I can speak with letting agencies. I think we all know the influential people in Tayside, of who manage a large scope of the rental market. And actually, let's invite them to the conversation, because they are a powerful, influential role in our city. That it's not just the local MPs. They have a very influential role in advertising to a swarm of students who arrive at the start of every academic year looking for a bed.
Well, you might be interested to know that there's a climate leaders group in Dundee, which is chaired by the current principal of Dundee University. So I think you've got somebody you can lobby right there.
Fabulous. Invite me for coffee, I'll be there.
And just to jump in there, Emma, on you. Hi, it's Josh here. I used to stay just off of Perth Road until last year, and our back garden, it was part of a similar probably area to where you are. It was all managed by Home Group, and they would come in every 2 weeks and spray everything and chop everything down. And so I think they would be brilliant to get involved as well, because I know that they take care of the gardens of a lot of properties across Dundee.
Yeah, they have factors, and their job is to keep things tidy, and what people expect is tidy, and what we need to learn to expect is untidy for nature, because quite often that's the way we'll get better outcomes from nature. But there can be those desire lines, those cues to care. So for instance, the paths of preference, that people call them different things, but if you've got a large area that just has maybe a cross mown across the middle of it so that people can get diagonally from one corner to another, the fact that that path is mowed indicates that somebody's looking after that space, but the rest of the area can belong. And it's those cues to care, those paths of preference and desire lines. If they're kind of helped, if they're mapped out, then it's clear that somebody's looking after the space and it's deliberate. And it sometimes can be just those little touches around the edges, doesn't have to be spraying, might be a tiny bit of mowing. But in the process, we leave a cue to care. We don't use as much diesel in those machines that do the mowing. We have less frequently to take a car or a van to that space to do the mowing. There's the carbon footprint of the care as well as the actual biodiversity benefit of
absolutely, absolutely. And just to jump in there, I think the key, I completely agree with you. And the point is, for creatures, living things that were there before you and that will continue to be there after you. And that is a very powerful narrative. Everyone who knows me knows I believe very strongly in supporting habitation for hedgehogs. We don't do that in a world where we're constantly putting up fences in urban environments. And I think the reality of 21st century Dundee is private rentals have a lot of influence in our city. And I think you need to invite them to the conversation.
Yes, Mary.
Rebecca, can I suggest that we just all walk more?
Yeah, I love that idea. I've been doing that so much. I've just been walking as much. I used to cycle a lot because I would cycle commute to work. Yeah. And I am working at home, and I have been for a really long time, it feels like. So actually I'm getting out for a walk. And in fact, at lunchtime today, I had to swim in the Tay. So I can walk to the Tay to have immerse myself in blue space. I can walk through green space to immerse myself in blue space, and I can be back for my meeting after lunch. So I feel very, very privileged to live in this area, and I feel really pleased that I walked through a desire line, through long grass, in order to get to the dunes, which are protecting our coast, which I could then step over and into the water, which is relatively clean. I feel very grateful for what we have, and we need to maintain what we have and improve it in order to get where we need to be. So yeah, let's all walk. Definitely, Mary, definitely. I think somebody else was trying to say something. Go ahead if you did.
Yeah, I was just going to say I've rewilded a small 50-metre square area of my garden, stopped mowing, planted welfare seeds, put in bug hotels, and I don't think I'm going to save the planet.
Oh, wonderful.
You might not save it on your own, but you'll probably save the individual species that are the individual insects that are living in that area.
All right, but I mean, global warming
so that means a lot to them.
Yeah, global warming requires a global solution, which should be on a macro level and a micro level. I'm the micro. The macro is government and corporations. they'll make.
No, you're only micro if you're doing it on your own. If everyone else does it too, it becomes macro. And I think that's where we need to go.
There's, what is it, 7 billion people? If we all did one thing, that would be a big impact.
Yeah, I think getting Boris to go green tomorrow would be difficult. But the power that we have as individuals is in voting and buying patterns. We can influence corporations by not buying the products. We can influence governments by not giving them our vote. I think that's where the major changes will come. And I will continue my rewilding, but I think I'd be better spending my time not voting for people that don't see the point of this and not buying products that are involved in intensive farming or burning fossil fuels or deforestation, all the major contributors.
Tom, I think you've put your finger on it. You need to do both.
Yeah,
it's not an either or anymore. We have to do as much as we can. You know, if you do one thing, brilliant. If you do two things, better. If you can do 3, 4, and it just all cascades and it normalizes as well. Just talking about the climate is actually a really powerful thing that you can do.
I know my neighbour stopped by it, but he's over the wall, and he went, "I saw you rewilded that area, so I'm doing it." So it's influencing people, and it's influencing by example. But I still think we need to get the government and the corporations.
You're right. You're absolutely right, and well done for doing the bit that you're doing. And maybe you want to register it on the Rewilding Dundee map as well, so that other people.
I've got it on my PC now, but I'm not in Dundee. But they did say I can use a different postcode.
Okay, well done, excellent. Thanks, Tom.
Yeah, I think there's a great opportunity for the garden to get people engaged in this, and got lots of ideas. And just across the way from us at Carsview Centre, the maintenance team there, the gardener, has made a great little meadow with desire lines running through it. I copied it to our trustees. I don't know if anyone's had a chance to look at it, but it's really inspiring. It can be done quite, and we had a No Mow May this year at the garden. It was fully advertised, posters on the gate. I mean, I'd like a No Mow lawn all the time, to be honest. But the gardener at Carsview, just to continue the story, he had all sorts of difficulties with his management team, wanted everything close cut, but he's stuck by his guns. It's looking great. I've already surveyed the wildflowers that are there, and if it continues, we'll keep surveying it every year, mow down at the end of the year, lift the risings, and we'll keep surveying every year. And I'm sure this would be a great case study, and we'll have all sorts of biodiversity increase in that small plot.
That sounds great, Jim. Well done. Now we've got 2 hands up, so I'm sorry
Kate
to cut
was
you
first.
off.
I think Kate was first.
Okay. Hi, Kate.
Hi, how are you? Lovely presentation. Thank you very much. I just wanted to back Tom up by saying that the macro is probably the most important. I mean, we all do these little things because I can't bear to sit in a petrol-driven car, you know, so I ride my bike everywhere, and my garden is as rewilded as it possibly can be. And that kind of alleviates my sense of personal guilt a little bit, but I'm very intensely aware, same as you, Tom, that that's really not going to cut it in the long term. It's got to be macro, it's got to be governmental. And if we're saving a few populations of insects in our collective gardens, and the industrialized agriculture still persists in churning everything up and really destroying everything on massive swathes of the countryside, it's difficult to see how that is really actually going to help. We're really just creating a little arc for when everything else changes, and everything else has to change. You know, we are at the point now where, well, we should have started 40 years ago in the 80s when it was first really publicized that this was a serious issue. And to be honest, I thought then, well, this isn't a big deal. We just cut down on the fossil fuels and, you know, turn over to renewables a bit and everything will be fine. So that's a simple thing to deal with. And at that point in time, I was much more concerned about the biodiversity loss and habitat loss, because I thought that was a much more difficult issue to tackle, just because extinction is extinction. And it turns out that I was probably right to be that concerned. I mean, obviously it's critical now, but that's because of the oil and gas companies lobbying. There was a report came out from the Lancet a couple of months ago called the EAT in capital letters, Lancet report, Food in the Anthropocene, and that really goes into some great detail on the food system and how it impacts on climate and biodiversity and human well-being. And it does the donut system, you know, Kate Raworth's donut economics kind of way of presenting things. And I think that that kind of feeds into the well-being economy, and the way that donut system looks at quantifying whether things are okay or not is a really, really good way to look at things.
Yeah.
So yeah, I just want to plug Extinction Rebellion Dundee, because I'm kind of here with my Extinction Rebellion Dundee head on.
Yeah, and I didn't mention Extinction Rebellion, but there's an awful lot of it. No, I'm sorry about that. But I wasn't because I was deliberately excluding it either. It's just that there's an awful lot of things going on. So I stuck with the things that had to do with, particularly that had nature agendas in them, that I thought, because it's the community garden, not that Extinction Rebellion isn't interested in nature, but no, there's so many things going on, Kate. There's tons of things going on. I didn't mention the Eden Project. I didn't mention a whole bunch of different stuff that I could have included. But I have seen you guys and joined you in Extinction Rebellion in some of your activities. And I think the raising awareness is critical, and the political pressure is critical, and the big picture is incredibly important. And the 1% of the richest 1% of the world has the greatest ability to make the change that globally we need. And that's where, you know, there's a really interesting discussion about how much we individually on this call can influence that richest 1%. But maybe some of their wealth comes from the investments that we have in our pensions, and maybe some of their wealth comes from where we bank, and maybe some of their wealth comes from what we choose to buy. So as Tom was saying, and I think Jim and others, those everyday choices that we make as consumers, whether our consumption is of an investment or of a carrot, you know, all of those are important things to think about in terms of how it's fueling that richest 1% of the population that really do have, if they chose to change, the change would accelerate much faster than if we did what we could do in our back gardens. I absolutely take your point.
It's something like the top 1% produce 50% of the greenhouse gases of personal things. The next percentage that we're probably in, just living in the West, is about 40%, and then there's this tiny amount for the other. Lou, what were you wanting to say something?
I was going to talk about banking, and then Rebecca, you did it for me, but I realised how embarrassing that I don't know who we bank with at the garden.
We bank with the Royal Bank, and I was trying to get us moved over to CAF Bank, and that fell flat on its face. So for Tom, for you to live up to your words, let's change to CAF Bank or Triodos.
Yeah, Triodos I've heard really good things about. I know that the folks that are involved in the Wellbeing Economy Alliance use the Triodos Bank and promote that as an example of one of the banks that's more ethically and nature aware. But yeah, I don't know the details of that, but thank you, Lou, for bringing that up.
I would vote for Triodos. I bang £500 a month into that bank. So yeah, let's do that, Tom. Let's change.
I'm hearing you.
Emma, were you going to say that? I don't know if Lou lost us and came back again. We've got you twice on the line, Lou, so I don't know if you've frozen on one and you're coming back on.
I disappeared, I'm afraid. Just dodgy internet and very loud background, clearly. But yeah, it should be relatively easy, Tom. I mean, it should be just a switch. I'm not entirely sure why you hit problems there, Jim, but I've been doing a lot of it recently, so if I can help, I will. I put a couple of things into the link for everybody about it's just some sites you can look at about how much impact your banking makes on, yeah, well, in terms of your personal capacity.
And also, if you're working or if you're getting a pension contribution from your employer, you can ask them those questions as well. You can say, you know, if you're investing money on my behalf or as a result of my employment, then, you know, is it being ethically invested? Is it going towards, you know, arms and weaponry? Is it going towards fossil fuels? Is it going towards things that I actually don't want any of my money associated with? So you can ask those questions, because at least it might make somebody think about it if they haven't thought about it before. Mary?
It's just while Lou is on, could we maybe talk a little bit about carbon cafes? Because we have discussed that happening in the garden possibly.
Yeah, so I've spoken to Dundee Rep. The woman I spoke to said, because she turned up at our climate cafe for Perth, she said, great idea, not my choice. All the programming team are on holiday. Talk to them when they get back. So I believe they're back next week and I will talk to them. But sorry, June and Helen, I saw you sent me a couple of emails about them as well. And yeah, just need to get on it really, or join you in getting on it. Whoever leads first is completely fine.
Right. Might be useful to include it as a potential part of the events associated with the Climate Beacon, if that helps, because that's an agenda that the rep team are already committed to and leading on. So joining dots is often helpful in persuading people to do the things that you want them to do.
They're currently, I don't know if it's closed yet, but advertising for a producer. So as soon as that person is in place, we can.
Yeah, it's closed, but I don't think the person's in place yet. Good. There's been some really good discussions, very wide ranging. It's fantastic.
And I sorry to come in again, Rebecca, but I got a Twitter feed today that the carbon emissions in the Amazon are now more than the carbon that's being absorbed, which is bad. Yeah. And just to come back to the conversation of macro versus micro, I still think that I agree with you that micro adds up. And if you don't get the micro involved, how are they going to know to vote for something else that to get the macro? And you'll also deny them the opportunity to improve their well-being through nature. Yeah,
I mean, I think if people they can't value what they don't see. They don't vote for what they haven't experienced. And so nature on our doorstep is really important for so many reasons. And I don't think it's one or the other. As Helena was saying, it's top down, bottom up, sideways, and everything in between.
Exactly. And it's been proven that if you get people engaged, they're then more likely to want to take care of it.
Yeah. Kate.
I just had a brief comment. Yeah, it just struck me when you were talking about the International Panel on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, just how ironic that is that they have to put it in terms of that. It's almost like, how much is it worth? Can we cost it? And if we can, it's worth it. And if we can't, then, you know, it's all about that human exceptionalism that says we're the most important thing on the planet. All the rest of it is subservient to us. And I think it's a very kind of historical attitude that's quite difficult to shift, because it's so embedded that humans are like the topmost, most advanced creature on earth, and everything else serves us. It's
very selfish as a species, aren't we?
Yeah, it's quite insidious, I think.
Yeah, so I mean, it's really interesting, because I've been working on ecosystem services for more than a decade now, and I've always made the argument that it's not about putting a treasury tag on the things. It's about actually embarking on the process of understanding that a thing has value and assigning value to it. You don't have to assign a monetary value to it, but if you recognize its importance within a system, it could be a biological system, it could be within a impact on a human system, but by recognizing that a thing exists and being able to quantify it, identify it, you don't have to necessarily value it for it to be recognized an ecosystem service. And I realize and have experienced a lot of debate over that sort of treasury tag, the monetary value associated with biological function. But I've never really gone down the environmental economics route in order to try and place value. I've sometimes quoted values that others have, like that green space is worth 111 pounds per year per person in the UK in terms of the health benefits. You know, there are people that have done those sorts of assessments, and they're almost certainly under assessments. They're almost certainly undervaluing the benefits to individual health from green space. But it's probably just they're valuing the saving to the NHS, which isn't the same as the value to the individual. It's a different thing. So yeah, I'm absolutely with you there. But I also would sort of push back a bit and say, if we don't take an ecosystem service approach and understand the values that things have within our knowledge system, then we don't recognize of not indeed enhancing them. And there doesn't really need to be a treasury tag. And they don't necessarily have to have a value to humans, but as humans, we have a lot of power over those environments. And even if we see that the absence of a fence has a value to a hedgehog, then our understanding of that means that we can change our activities, regardless of how much the fence costs or how much the hedgehog value is to our ecosystem service network. But it's about understanding the relationships within ecosystems and understanding that we're part of the ecosystem. So we're not separate from it, we're inherently part of it. I've mentioned hedgehogs. Sorry, Emma, I knew that I'd get you going. Come on in again.
Just last 3 minutes now, folks.
Go ahead, Emma.
Hedgehogs will always get me going. I don't know if it has any value, and I'm not going to articulate this well, but just playing on human need, I'm a psychologist. In a past life, I worked in London on a trading floor. Within 6 hours, I'd be on a first-class flight to the Middle East with no prep. In a post-COVID world, corporates don't want to do that because it costs them revenue that isn't going to their shareholders. So I wonder if there is something as an education piece here that actually you'd be put on a first-class corporate flight to the Middle East. You're not exposed to that culture. You're not exposed to the climate burden that afflicts the poorest in that country. Because you're put in some 5-star hotel somewhere near to the airport. Actually, I think there's an education piece here among, when I look at just keeping it local, look to Dundee. Who are our biggest employers in Dundee? Who are our biggest corporates? And actually an education piece around actually their green strategy and actually money they would have been perhaps investing in business development, in organisational development in a pre-COVID world may not be being spent in a post-COVID world or an ongoing COVID world. How can we best invest that revenue such that it supports your green agenda? And if you don't have a green agenda, why don't you?
I think that there's a whole lot of work that's happening on climate finance, and well, you can pick holes in it for sure. But when you've got people like Mark Carney, who used to be the head of the Bank of England, who's now sort of basically climate finance lead, who talks an awful lot of sense about the need for a change in our value systems. What do we value and what do we pay for those things? And one of the the analogies that he might make is, we understand how much we value carers and NHS, but our economic system doesn't reflect what we say in terms of our value of those systems. So he sees this disconnect. He's a huge amount of respect within financial circles globally. And when you have individuals like that are leading the charge in terms of pushing for climate-friendly financial systems that are climate aware, that are not wasteful, that are not destructive, then I think there's something to be hopeful. And maybe we should end on a hopeful note. But if you've got whole economies and influencers within global economies making those arguments at the same time as Tom and Jim doing their piece, and Helena and June doing their bit, and all the volunteers and the different organisations, and Extinction Rebellion pushing for the political influence and the public awareness as well, then I've never seen so much attention to climate matters as I have seen in this year with COP26 coming to the UK and being in Scotland. And I think that we should take we should take some joy in that, because although there is a long way to go and there are many things still wrong with the system, we have a platform and we've got a springboard now where the kids in school are wanting their school to be an eco school. We don't have time to wait till they're in employment to make a difference. We've got to make a difference now before they get there. But there's an awful lot of awareness, there's a lot of action, and there's funding. And the thing that I think we should be really cognizant of is it not stopping on the 12th of November. What we need to do, if COP26 is the springboard, what we can all do in our own micro or macro way is maintain the pressure for those actions to meet the nationally determined contributions, to meet Dundee's commitment to the Covenant of Mayors. We can all keep the pressure up after COP26 party finishes, and actually that's when the hard work needs to continue. So I think the call to action is for now and then.
Rebecca, thank you so very much. I knew this was going to be a really interesting presentation, and it's even been better than I imagined. I think you have a really good way of telling us the information, stimulating us and motivating us. And we'll certainly continue these conversations with our own group of volunteers and our own committee. So thank you for your time in doing the presentation and preparing it, etc. And we'll keep in touch. Thanks everyone else for your contributions to the conversation, because that's really what made it good as well. Thanks for coming to the AGM. Thanks for all your work throughout the year. We're going to have another exciting year. We've got lots on the agenda, lots to do, a new member of staff. It's fabulous. So for now, thank you, Helena, for being my main person tonight. You can sign us all now out, go away, get the last bit